Welcome, witches, wizards, and muggles alike, to another enchanting episode of Magical Tales from the Slytherin Common Room, bringing your favorite Harry Potter fanfiction to audio format. So sit back, relax, and Accio headphones, and let the magic begin.
Two Weddings and a Manhunt by Deydralinne, Chapter 14. August 23rd, 2003. Draco stood in the doorway watching her fiddle with her dress in the mirror, picking at parts of it and flattening it down. They would be attending her first gala tonight, since she had stepped into the position open to the Malfoy family among the Hogwarts Board of Directors. She was nervous, he could tell. She had spent 4.5 years at the Ministry and had never gotten close to coming face to face with them. His mother had come to stay last night and brought with her a gown for Hermione. It was made from a silk cream-colored fabric with shimmering gold sequins swirling around that hugged her hips before flaring out mid-thigh. The front had a deep, plunging neckline exposing the fine curves of Hermione's cleavage. The back was left completely open, and he would be lying if he said that seeing her like this didn't make his chest tighten a little. They had been working on giving and accepting compliments this past week at her mind healers. Draco had been tasked with finding at least one opportunity a day to open himself up to vulnerability and compliment Hermione, not just something she has done. "You look incredible, Granger," he spoke quietly. Her eyes darted up to meet his in the reflection of the mirror. The top half of her hair was pulled back and pinned in place with an orbital hairpin, the rest of her curls falling naturally around her shoulders in delicate waves. "You look fairly dashing yourself," she smiled back at him. His outfit wasn't anything special. He had a rotation of suits he wore to events like this, crossed somewhere between modern dress robes and muggle business suits, but he accepted the compliment for what it was. Tonight, after all, was about Hermione. "Ready when you are." Tonight, they would travel through the flow to Hogwarts. It wouldn't be the first time he had been back since the battle, but it still wasn't a place he felt comfortable being. A sharp nod from Hermione, and she strolled to his side. "Thank you for coming with me tonight. You are much more experienced at this type of thing than I am, and I would feel a little bit like a fish out of water without you there." Hermione looked up at him as her hand affectionately came to grip his elbow. "I'm sure you will do fine, with or without me, Hermione. You are the brightest witch of our age, after all. But, of course, I am happy to accompany you," Draco mumbled back. He was happy to accompany her. It was everyone else that he would have to schmooze that he wasn't so thrilled about. His mother had spent several hours over the last week tutoring Hermione on the names of everyone else on the board, their wives, children if they had them, grandchildren, who was friendly with who, what topics to avoid with certain members, and whose wives she should get on her side. "It's less about the ideas you're pushing and more about how likable you are to the rest of the board," Narcissa had explained. They stepped through the flow in the office, Hermione's grip tightening, no doubt relieving previous experience when returning from Las Vegas. Thankfully this time, though, much shorter, and she was able to step out the other side without so much as a wobble in her step. Headmistress Minerva McGonagall stood before them, a surprised but pleased smile on her face at their arrival. "Miss Granger, Mr. Malfoy, what a pleasure to see you both." The elderly witch bustled, looking between the two. Draco searched her face for any traces of judgment or disapproval, but found none. She genuinely seemed happy to see them. Draco didn't doubt that more so applied to Hermione than himself. "Professor, you look incredible," he offered with a slight bow. A small blush rose in Headmistress's face, waving her hand to dismiss his compliments. "Hush now, Mr. Malfoy. I'm so pleased to see you both again. I'm sure you won't have any trouble locating the Great Hall." "I think we'll manage. Will you be joining us later, Professor? I would love to catch up properly." Hermione's soft voice floated out. "Yes, I will come down once all the guests have come through," she smiled. "Excellent, then we shall see you later." Draco followed Hermione from the office, his hand resting with a feather touch against her lower back. They had agreed, following Hermione's acceptance of the committee seats, to at least in public keep up pretenses of an intentional marriage. The other committee members would be less judgmental towards her if they thought they were a legitimate union. The Malfoys were still the wealthiest family in this part of the world, and the only reason to schmooze up to Hermione was if they believed she would continue to have access to those funds. The Great Hall was beautifully decorated. Staff in suits that reminded him of the penguins from the zoo floated around the room with trays of hors d'oeuvres or glasses of champagne or whiskey. Keeping his hand on her back, he retrieved a glass of champagne and handed it to Hermione. Smiled her appreciation, but he could tell she was remembering his mother's warning. No more than 2 glasses throughout the night. You want to always be holding a glass to provide the appearance of engagement, but not to drink enough that your judgment may become impaired. He took a glass of whiskey for himself. "Ready?" he said beneath his breath. A smile and a small nod were her response. He guided them toward Tomley Smith, the current president of the board. "Mr. Malfoy, what a pleasant surprise. Ah, and of course, Mrs. Malfoy, congratulations, you two. I was so pleased to hear that you were claiming your seat once more. I'm afraid the board has rather missed Narcissa's input the last couple of years." He was a large old man with an impossibly round face. His cheeks had a permanent purple tinge to them, Draco suspected from poor circulation. "The pleasure is ours, Mr. Smith," Hermione replied gracefully. "It has been too long since our family was active in the community, and it is so important. Unfortunately, Draco has just been so busy with work that it hasn't been feasible until now." Hermione smiled sweetly. She didn't have to be worried because she had stepped into this role as though she had been born for it, and in a way, she had. He had discovered earlier in the week that in the Muggle world, her family had been the equivalent to the Greengrass family. Her parents had been wealthy and wildly successful dentists who had owned a chain of clinics throughout England. It had always been intended for Hermione to go to boarding school, though one in magical nature had been a surprise. Her summers had been crammed with dance classes, French lessons, piano lessons, and table etiquette classes as his had, the difference, however, being that both of her parents had loved her very much. His mother had loved him, of course, but it was harder to show him when his father had been around. "I couldn't agree with you more, Miss Malfoy. Now, you must tell me if there is any truth to that article in the Prophet the other week. Are we to be expecting a new Malfoy sometime soon?" Draco wanted to scowl at the nosy old bastard, but he held a tight smile. Hermione chuckled and rolled her eyes, as if the thought of eloping and being pregnant with his love child was preposterous. "Oh, come now. You know as well as I that Rita Skeeter hasn't written an honest word in her career. There is no truth. Draco and I are both rather private by nature is all." She waved her hand dismissively. Draco couldn't help but be impressed by her charm. "Speaking of which, I believe congratulations are in order. Your eldest daughter is pregnant with your first grandchild, is she not?" It was a smooth deflection. They stood politely and listened to him ramble in pride about how she was expecting a boy and they thought they might name him Oedicus after his father. Every so often, a flash in the background will pull at Draco's peripheral vision, indicating someone somewhere was being photographed. He hoped that at least one of those photos would include Hermione and her discussion with Ptolemy, and he hoped even more that it would find its way onto the cover of the Prophet tomorrow morning. He didn't know why, but he had become somewhat invested in ensuring Hermione made as many of her desired changes as she could before they went their separate ways, and it would be great for her public image to be seen as friendly with the president of Hogwarts' board of directors. "Tell me, dear, you're young and full of fresh ideas. What's one change you think would benefit our future generations?" Ptolemy asked as he puffed on a cigar. Hermione, quite the actress, pretended to contemplate his question for a moment. Ptolemy winked at Draco, who smiled back. He knew that he was asking her this only because she had passed some hidden tests that he had been conducting on her. After a moment, Hermione sipped her champagne. "I suppose it would be beneficial for all students that they all spend a week or two here at Hogwarts the year before they are expected to start their schooling. Muggleborns would be able to have a less jarring introduction to this world, and those of the magical-born families would be able to begin friendships with these children sooner. Perhaps even become pen pals for a year. It's common for children of the wizarding families to grow up being friends with the children of other wizarding families, which in my opinion is fantastic, but can be daunting to those who are starting from scratch the very first day of school." Her answer seemed to surprise Ptolemy. He had no doubt expected a spiel on curriculum reform of Muggle studies or the like. Instead, what she was proposing was rather achievable. Certainly a great idea in which we should think about implementing, Miss Malfoy." She returned his praise with a warm smile. Draco could tell inside she was bouncing, but kept her composure. "Say, where is Eleanor? Did she not join you tonight?" Hermione sidelined. Ptolemy looked mildly impressed that Hermione knew his wife and had noticed her absence. No, she's staying close to Lavina in case she goes into labor. I think she's more excited than Lab for this baby to be born. He smiled. Finally, another gentleman came and distracted Ptolemy, allowing them to slip away and continue making their rounds of those gathered. Draco barely needed to speak. Hermione carrying much of the conversations and winning over witches and wizards all around. Occasionally, Draco would casually drop in that Hermione had just been speaking to Ptolemy about this great idea, turning the attention towards the hopeful change. Of course, as soon as they had been charmed by Hermione and heard that Ptolemy also thought it was a great idea, don't be modest, darling, they ate it up themselves, scrambling amongst each other to try and implement it as soon as possible. Perhaps over Christmas holidays would allow them enough time. After nearly 2 hours, they finally found themselves alone in the corner for a breather. Granger, you're shaking. Are you cold? Draco frowned with concern when he went to cast a warming charm but stopped as she shook her head. She looked at him with wide eyes and the faintest hints of watering glazing her caramel eyes. I cannot believe it. Draco, do you know how many times I tried to suggest this exact idea at the ministry? The ministers for education regulation wouldn't even meet with me. One gala, and people are rushing to push it through, snowballing ideas on how to expand on it and make it better. Do you know what a difference that will make to Muggleborns in particular? To not come into this world 2 weeks before they're expected to leave their parents, knowing nothing and no one? I can't believe it. It seems ridiculous how easy that was after years, literal years, of what I can only describe as bashing my head against a brick wall. She shook her head again in disbelief, knocking a strand of her hair free from a pin. Draco reached out and tucked it behind her ear. Hermione stared up at him for only the briefest of moment before reaching up to lightly press her lips against the corner of his mouth. Thank you for being here and not putting up a fight about me taking the position. For just being you, Draco. You were truly an amazing person. And just for a moment, he forgot how to breathe.